Alright, now here we go. Now we finally apply some dirt and shadows and all kinds of stuff to our particular livery. Now, for the sake of this tutorial, I'm going to keep mine as is, because I've already made, a few things known to people that this particular paint that they have is pretty much the one I'm going to try to duplicate in these videos. But that doesn't mean you can't create a dirty paint, and I'm going to show you how. Now, before you move on here, before you start adding all kinds of filth, you might want to make sure everything else is finalized. And by that I mean things like these labels here. Add whatever labels you want to create, and maybe like this area here, go through your donut, make sure there's no rivets underneath it. Being that this blending mode is as it is, if there were rivets, you would see them because it is transparent. And anything else you can think of, go ahead and make sure that you have, everything done the way you want it to be done. This is the final steps, and we will do a couple small things in the next video, but nothing major. We're going to be flattening and getting this ready for its new home. Now, on that note, I went ahead and I moved my rivets and lines folder, or group, out of the fuselage group, and it's right underneath my names, temp. And actually, since this is no longer a temp, I'm going to go ahead and take temp right out of there. Now, before I show you how to add dirt or create your own dirt, I want to first look around the dirt that's already on the fuselage and maybe enhance that for my specific paint. Now, before you do some of these steps may be destructive. And by that what I mean is, I'm not going to be backing up the layers because that's going to increase my file size. The more you back up, the larger your PSD is going to be. And you might not know it right away. You might be in Photoshop right now, maybe duplicate this layer a few times here, just this nose dirt, and make some other changes, and before you know it, your PSD is doubled in size, and you close it, and then tomorrow you go to open it, and guess what? You're in for a rude awakening. You can't. It won't open. Or it takes 25 minutes to open. So heed these warnings. And a couple tips real quick. If you look at my folder here, I have a Dantrix Airlines clean folder and a dirty folder. And these right here are really just the PSDs folder. I break them up, I duplicate them, and I name them whatever the paint's going to be. I've been doing this way for years now. And that way I can always say, well, let's see, in my Iron Maiden paint, I had this kind of cool effect going and I want to duplicate that. So in that next MD11 paint, I'll start off with a copy of that Iron Maiden paint rather than a fresh, unopened, untouched, unfixed paint kit. Okay? So looking here, we have the backup, or I have a backup of my fuselage master, and you can see it's 394 megabytes fresh out of the kit. And if you look at the one I have right now, you're looking at 465.5 megabyte. All right, so again, we haven't done all that much, and you can see how much has already changed. In this particular video, that size is going to get a lot bigger, especially if we backed up. Okay, so you might want to save a copy right now. What I like to do is I like to save degradational backups, and that means maybe name it the date. Today's date, say backup of, January 28th, and so on and so on. So I'm going to go ahead and go up here into the general weather folder, and let's go into that. And I want to say dirt and streaks for now. And right now I'm looking at the nose dirt, so let me take care of that one. I have a dark bottom, so for me, all I'm going to do here is I'm going to increase its opacity. Now, I don't want to go all the way to 100 because now I'm not seeing my door outline. I want to see that, so I'm going to drop it about 90, 91, and that's better. Now, what else do I have here? I have the shadows, which I'm fine with. I'm not going to touch them. I have this bottom belly dirt here, and that is belly dirt right here. Now, you have to be very careful because there's a lot of paint kits that will say like belly dirt, but it's going to be a lot more than belly dirt. Before I go duplicating anything, what I like to do is I like to first go ahead and see what's on that layer. And I do so with a quick transform. Just Control T and check out where that box is, what it's around, and I can see here it's just around the belly, and that's good, so I'll hit Escape to cancel that. So now looking at the belly color, I'm going to do the same thing. It's got a opacity down to 40. I want it darker, so I'm going to jack that up. So some of your dirt is really just a matter of doing that, and if you're worried about these hard edges here, don't, because this is actually going to be cut out and be your tire later. You'll have the hub there, but the tire will replace that, so don't worry about that. So what's next here? We have this area right here, and this sharp edge might only be because of the fact that I have this particular color layer under here, or this color bottom. I have this blending mode applied to my flat plate. So you could play around with this a little bit. It's the top one here, I believe. Yep. So right now it's set to normal. If you had a white bottom, you might want to set that to multiply, or maybe even like linear burn, you know, and play around with it. And then of course you still have to worry about the edge on some of these because of how we've done it. So I'm going to now erase just this. I'm going to hit E for my eraser tool. And if I click right now, if I were to erase this, it's a hard brush. So it's 100% hard. Let's say my opacity was all the way up. My flow rate was all the way up. So now I have a brush that's hard. So let's zoom in here and I'll show you what I mean. If I were to erase this hard edge, I'm leaving a hard edge. Alright, so I don't want that. So a hard brush is a hard brush. It's going to take away 100% of anything that's inside of your brush. Now I want a soft brush. I'm going to go up here to my brushes here, and I'm going to choose a, let's say a 100. And all these are as sizes. So a 300 is a soft brush, a 200 is a soft brush, and they're all a soft brush. You're only looking at the diameter change up here. So with that 100 soft brush, I'm going to go ahead and just clean up this edge. Maybe clean up this top here. And this edge out here. Alright, I'm going to go down and do the same thing down here. And that's it. Looks good to me. Maybe even just a little more there. So APU dirt. Now there, I'm not going to really touch anything. And all we're looking at here is the door, the APU door dirt. Is this seam right here, your access panel to your APU, which is actually like an engine here. So if we toggle that off and on, we could see it. You might want to, say, duplicate that with Control J a few times to get some more filth out of it. Maybe merge them together and then play with the opacity. I'm not going to bother, I like it as is. So we're pretty much done this section with the exception of the belly fairing bottom, and I'll touch on that in a minute. Going up into my fuselage grime here, you have the aerodynamic dirt. And again, focus on these files. I mean, really learn from these. See why it's set to multiply. See why it's 25, or what it might look like at 100%. So I'm going to jack that up to 100. Zoom out here to about 50. And take a look. So this is one, if I was creating a dirty aircraft, I would want to play around with this. 100% isn't enough for me. And I'm going to leave the blending mode at multiply for now. I'm going to go ahead and maybe duplicate this one at 100% a few times. Control J. And I want dirtier, dirtier. I always want to exaggerate it now, and I can play with the opacity later. So that's good. So I'm going to turn off the bottom on visibility, therefore backing up that layer. Only that layer. And I'm going to merge these other copies I made. And you can see when I merge them, it set my blending mode to normal. And that's fine because I want to cycle through these now and play around with them. It was set to multiply, but I don't want multiply. I don't want multiply because I'm not seeing my fuse color. So I have that white back there and I want to see the white more through this dirt. So I'm going to start at normal and use my mouse wheel here and scroll over and play around with these. Now that's a very cool look, but be careful. What might look cool for your whites might not look cool for your midtones. And look at the hue. Look at the amount of saturation. I don't like that at all. That would look pretty pathetic at dawn and dusk. I can guarantee you that right now. But it still gives me some ideas for later. That is a really cool look. But I'm going to play around with this a little bit more. I'm going to go ahead and maybe go down to, let's see here. There we go. Now hard light, I can see the light's much brighter, and I still have my dirt without it being affected really. Let's look around the fuselage and see what else. See if this is a winner. And I do like it. It's not showing too much hue. I'm not getting too much contrast difference here. And it is giving me a nice wear look. Ooh, and I really like that. What I'm seeing here is, if you look at the fuselage base here, you can see that it's got a nice cool oxidized look to my paint. And I like that a lot. So what else would I want to do with this? Well, let me zoom back out of here to 50. And I don't want that much filth, but I also don't want to turn it down. I want to keep it that dirty in the dirty areas. So what I'm going to do with my copy here is I'm going to just erase certain areas. Now I'm going to go up to my brushes here. Let me jack that up to 100. And I'm going to find a nice brush. It's not bad. And I'll go back to that one. So I want to erase some of this here. And let me first check my brush spacing. That's a little too tight for me. I'm going to go ahead into my brush properties and maybe shape tip. Maybe increase that a bit. That's not bad. I like that. Maybe drop that down a little bit. And what do we got now? That's better. All right, so put that back in its spot. And now I'm just going to paint a little bit with this and see what I can come up with here. Just random, random spots, therefore leaving a lot of the fuselage really clean. It's kind of like painting with effects, but what I'm doing here, rather than painting with effects, is I'm really just applying it fully dirty and then just erasing it like we saw in the last tutorial. Alright, so as we get to the back here, I want to check out what this is giving me more. I want to see if I'm getting that cool oxidized look, and I am. And that's very cool. Very cool. I really like that. That's a very cool look. And if I was making a really filthy aircraft, this would probably be my choice and my way about going about it. So if I zoom in here to 100%, whoa. We can see that it's got some really cool filth, but maybe a little bit more than you're used to. Maybe even change this color to like a gold color, so you have more of a rustic kind of look. The choices are endless. Like I'm hoping I'm getting that point across by now. It's just really giving me a lot of coolness just in this one layer. Alright, so I'm going to zoom back out here to say 25%. And I'm going to kill this layer. I'm not going to make this dirty aircraft, and you're welcome to, but I'm going to just turn my original back on and get out of fuselage grime here. Now, if we look at the belly fairing bottom, okay, the belly fairing bottom might make you assume that, again, it's the bottom, but do a transform of it, and you will see that it's actually covering everything. And what else is it covering? Well, let's zoom in here and find out. If we look at our rivets and our lines, and you might have created your own like mine, let me turn off my rivets, and let's look at what this remnants here is, this dirt. Well, if we toggle this off and on, we can see that that's what it is. The rivets and line dirt is actually that particular layer. So I want to create my own, but first I want to make sure that it's only doing that. So let me go up here to my belly, play with that a little bit. Alright, so I'm pretty content to where I can just keep this off. And since I made my own rivets, I'm going to actually, you know what I got to do? I have to go back into fuse grime here, and I have this at 100%. I need to set that back to 25. It's default. And there we go. Now I can take a look here again, the belly fairing bottom here, and see what they did, maybe get some ideas how to do it myself. Alright, well I got a basic idea and I'm going to go with it. So I'm going to go ahead and, once again, I'm going to shut that off. I'm going to go down to my rivets and lines. I'm going to turn the visibility on, and I'm going to take these three, I'm going to drag them into my create new layer, and that's going to duplicate them. And I'm going to go ahead and turn my fill up to 100% on each one of these copies. And I'm going to merge these three together. Control E. And drag this up top into my dirt here, so I have them all in the same spot. And I'm going to call it rivet dirt. Now I want to go down here also, and I want to shut the visibility off on these for now. I just want to see my dirt. Now we haven't talked about filters much. The reason for that is because, again, just like the brushes and all these other techniques that we're learning, it's not only its own video, but it could be its own series of videos. There's so much cool power to be had in those filters. So they will be discussed in time, and I do have a tutorial already on the displacement maps. So there will be a lot more tutorials down the road on filters, but outside of this series. So let's go ahead and cover a few. I'm going to go into filter, and let's see, what do I want here? Stylize, I'm going to say wind. Now it gives me a preview here. I'm not going to see much because the rivets are so small, so I can zoom way in here. And you're still not going to see much. So I'm going to just say wind, and from the left. I want it coming from this way. Hit OK. And there we go. It renders it out, and I have some cool looking wind. Now of course this is just from left to right or right to left, so my lines don't look all that affected. But I can now, rather than having to go back into filter, stylize, wind, if you look up top, you'll see that it remembers the last filter you applied. So rather than having to go through it, you can just hit Control F and duplicate that filter. And let me take a look around here. I kind of like that. That to me looks a lot like they might have done. And I got a little bit of smearing here on my rivets, and it fades them out well, and I like it. I'm going to go with this. So let me go up here and take a look. And it looks good. So that's pretty much it, with the exception of now I want to erase random areas. I don't want it that dark. Not at all. Before I play with my opacity, I'm going to go ahead and choose a very, very large yet soft brush, but not that soft, maybe 50%ish. And start to erase. That's actually too hard of a brush. Let me turn that back down all the way. Let's try that. Alright, that's good. Increase my brush size, and I'm going to zoom out of here to make this a little faster. And I'm just going to go through here, and I'm just going to go grab a few spots. Nothing major. And once again, I'm just trying to duplicate what they had. And that's about it. I'm going to leave the bottom because the bottom is, of course, dark, so it's fine for me, at least for this paint. And maybe a little dab there. So we have the ones that we just created here, the rivet dirt, and then we have the bottom. So let's turn those on and mine off. And we can see we're pretty much right on, with the exception of the opacity being 40. If we jack that up, let's go ahead and compare these again. Alright, so I don't know, I think we did a pretty good job here. I'm going to go ahead and shut that one back off, turn mine back on, and actually let me turn the bottom one to 40 in case I forget on the road. And for my rivet dirt, actually, I'm going to take that back out of this folder. I'm going to put it back into my group here. So there it is underneath my rivets. I can turn mine back on, and their fill is at 21, which is what I want, and that's it. Now, don't worry about the effects and everything else for the rivets and the lines. We will get into that in the next tutorial before we flatten. Alright, so what's next on the list here? Let's now go ahead and create a little bit of shadowing, or let me show you how to do some shadowing. Now here you have the shadows don't touch, so you can go in here and just toggle the visibility off and on and see what they are. And you can also do something I haven't really gone over yet. I'm hesitant to do so because I really don't want anybody saying that, you know, I ruined their paint kit. Okay, so now early on I told you to drag your white base to the very top, and that was because old versions of Photoshop, I'm not sure that they have this feature. I think it was CS2 and above. I'm not 100% on that though. But if I want to say see just this fuselage shadow layer and not the rest, you might think that you have to go ahead and, you know, shut every visibility off and then just leave this one on. You could also solo this one's visibility, okay? But there are some cautions, you know, and some warnings that you're going to want to adhere to. Now, if I click this, I'm shutting the visibility on and off. If I alt-click it, voila, we have just the shadows. Okay, so I can see the shadows here. I can see what it's set to, multiply. I might get some really cool ideas from here. And I like it. Now, I've just learned a lot just from looking at this right here. Okay, so how do we create that? How do we create a shadow? Well, shadows are simple. I mean, shadows are really simple. It really depends on how you do it. But before we get into that, we need to unsolo our layer. And if you alt-click it again, it's going to unsolo everything, remembering every state that every folder was in. And not just the folders, the groups, but it's going to remember each one's subgroups or layers within those groups. So, something very cool to keep in mind, you know. But here's the kicker. If I were to solo a layer, like say this aerodynamic dirt, for instance, and I then created a new layer and I started doing things other than this, and down the road I came back to here and I tried to unsolo it, I'm not going to be able to. It's not going to do anything at all. And you're going to have to either rely on a very good memory on every single layer that you had the opacity or visibility set to, and set them again, or open up another copy of your backup, which hopefully you made, and bill yourself out that way. In either case, be very careful when using that solo feature. Alright, so I'm going to zoom out here, and I'm going to just go ahead and create a new layer above here. That's fine. And I'm going to, with my marquee tool, just drag a selection so I could just show you one area. I'm going to drag it actually over my bottom color, and I'm going to drag it over, say, half of my aircraft. And I'm going to fill this with black. So Alt, backspace, it's now filled with black. Now, because of the fact that I'm above this layer here that has this blending mode multiply, it's changing my transparency for this layer. So I'm going to go ahead and drag that above, actually out of general weather altogether. And now I can see it. Alright, so I don't want this group's, you know, attributes up here. I want just it. So not the layer. In this case, it's not the layer. It's actually the group's opacity. So now I'm out of that. I'm going to deselect my selection. I'm going to go down here to Layer Mask, create a new Layer Mask. And now I could just paint here, or I could grab my gradient tool and just give myself a gradient. Now, white showing, black hiding, I would want to start up here and just drag myself a gradient. And there we go, I have myself a gradient. But the bottom I'm not going to want that way, so what I'm going to do in this case is if I find the bottom of the aircraft, which is right here, make a mental note of that. I'm actually just pointing to my monitor right now. So here's the spot I'm pointing to. So right there is where I want my white to, everything past this or above it is now going to be white, and everything below it will be gradient to black. So there we go. So I have now just created my shadow, and I can play with its opacity if I want, and everything back here is staying black, and everything over here is gradually fading. Now I could also grab myself a brush, maybe a really soft brush, say a 300 in size, actually increase that a bit. And I could just paint with white. Whoops, flip that color, I want to paint with black. Okay, so maybe do your shadows that way. Let me undo just that. Click once here, go to the edge and shift click. And there you go, I've created shadow. If I want to move this down the road, I can just go ahead and select my movement tool and nudge it up to where I want my shadow. And I could fill in this back here just by hitting my brush tool, and I want to change its hardness back to 100, actual black, and do it to the layer. So there we go. I've now fixed all that. And of course you're going to want to cut out your other details here that you don't want to be so shadowed. But you get the idea. And you could also use that technique for dirt. So one final step I want to cover here. I'm going to go ahead and delete this one. And I'm going to close these up because I have no more use in them. Tidy up these. And there we go. Clean as you go. Alright, so now I want to create my own dirt. I want some really large streaks of dirt that I can play with. So to do this, I'm going to create a new layer. And I'm going to go ahead and fill this with black. Now, right now, I'm within this PSD, and that could be a bad thing, because I don't want to rotate this. If I rotate this whole thing, then it's going to take a while to rotate each layer. So I don't want to do that. So I'm actually going to go ahead and delete this layer here. I'm going to hit, actually, let me go up here to image size. I want to see what its size is. I'm going to copy this value, because I won't remember that, but I will remember this. And I'm going to do the reverse here. I'm going to create a new image, and I'm going to say its height, that larger value, and this width 4096. And bear with me, you'll see in a second. I'm going to fill this with black, Alt backspace. Go up here to Filter, Render, and Fibers. And this gives me some cool streaking. I can play with the variance a bit. I could crank it. And for me, I want streaks. So I'm going to go back down here to around what I had. And if you're ever looking for some deep scratches, you know, play with this. Crank up your strength. I don't want that for this, so I'm going to bring that back down. Hit OK. And there you go. It's now rendered some very cool looking dirt. And I have a very large file here. But before I even worry about blending modes, I'm going to go ahead and delete all the white out of here. And I'm going to do so by going into Channels and hitting this little shortcut down here to load channel as selection. And it's going to select all of my white. And if you were working on a multicolor image, you would probably want to just select a certain layer and do it that way. And we'll get into that maybe in another tutorial. So I'm going to just hit delete. And now I'm left with just my blacks and my darker grays. So I'm going to duplicate this a couple of times and merge them all down. And I'm going to hit F now to get out of here. And I'm going to first rotate this, say 90 degrees counterclockwise. So now I have my streaks going in that direction of my fuselage. But I want to add a little bit of maybe wind to this. So I'm going to go back up here to stylize wind. And from the left, and that looks fine. So let's see. I want a little more wind, so I'm going to hit Control F. And that's good. But I want a little blurring too. It's not that quite blurred. Let's actually see what it looks like on the fuselage first. So I'm going to just drag this over, hold Shift, and let it go. Go back into this full screen, and zoom in here to the fuselage. Okay. So let me set my blending mode right now. So I'm going to go to multiply so I can see better. And that's cool. That gives me what I want. Really, really filthy. It's not blurry enough for me. So I'm going to go up to Filter, Blur, and I'm going to choose Gaussian Blur. And it's giving me a live preview here. I don't even have to look at this small little box it gives me. So 1.3 is actually good. If I would really want a lot of blur, I could come out here. And that's just way too much. That's good for maybe smudging. but I don't want that much blurring, so I'm going to just say 2.5. That looks good. But don't stop there. Don't stop with just your blending modes and everything else. Of course, you're going to get your better effect here with either erasing it or maybe applying a mask. I'm going to choose to erase it. It didn't take me long to create that. I'm going to grab my eraser. I'm going to choose a brush that we had earlier here. And let me see what we got. Kind of like the same thing I already showed you with using the other layer for it. But now I have my own custom dirt and I can play around with it. Okay, so hopefully that gives you some ideas. And you know, if you combine all these ideas, well, you're going to be pretty dangerous there, kid. So again, don't just stop there. Maybe even apply some effects to it. Give it a bevel. You know, your dirt, a bevel. Change it to a pillow emboss. And maybe change your type of dirt or your contour. That's a little ridiculous. But you get the idea. So do play around with these on your own. You can get some cool paint ripple effects. That's actually not a bad look. I'll keep that for now. And continue to go in here and erase. And right there we've created something that might take people days and days and days to create. We have a very cool bumping effect, kind of like our paint is bubbled and is ready to peel. If I was to convert this over to a bump map right now, that would look sweet. And you would be seeing some really cool techniques. But there's some do's and don'ts with bump mapping, and we'll cover that eventually. There is actually one area here that I do want to get, and that is my APU intake, or vent, or vein, both. So using the same technique that I just used here, I'm going to go into my dirt. I'm going to just put it right in here, say right there, and I will call this my APU dirt, just like that. It's enough for me to know. So I'm going to go ahead and drag out a box here, fill it with black, and same like we did a little while ago, I'm going to say filter, render fibers, and hit OK. Now here I'm just going to go ahead and set its blending mode to multiply. Let's see what I got. Not bad. Deselect that, and I'm going to transform this and rotate it into place and shrink it down. And that's giving me some really tiny fibers, which is cool. And maybe Alt drag this so it's shrinking to the center. And that's it. Hit enter. Now let me go in here to a couple 100%. 300. There we go. I'm going to shut off my visibility. I'm going to hit L to select my polygonal lasso tool. And I'm just going to draw out a cheap, quick selection here. Nothing major. Doesn't have to be. And there we go. I'm going to turn that back on. Now I don't want to delete that because it's just going to delete that. I want to do the opposite. So Control-Shift-I, delete everything around it on that layer. And there we go. Deselect that. And now that's a lot of filth. So I'm going to turn down that opacity a bit. Maybe a bit more. And that's good. Now I want an effect here because I don't like how I can barely see the edge here. I can see it a little bit better now with the dirt in there, but I want more than that. So I'm going to go ahead and give it a bevel emboss to get my shadow. Now, yeah, you would think that I might want to create an inner shadow or a drop shadow, but I don't. I want to do a bevel emboss, and I want to play around with this lighting because we have the light coming in from the front, but say up towards the top roof, maybe at like a 45 or 60 degree angle here. So I want my light to be in the back and on the bottom, and my shadows to be forward and top. So let me play around with that. And that's good. So I'm just going to leave it just like that. But my edges, I don't know if you could see it in the video, but my edges are a little jaggedy, a little rough. Now there are ways to do that. I could choose my blur tool here, and let's say bring my brush size down, get myself a normal brush, actually. Maybe 35. And I can blur that. But you see what's happening? It's spilling onto the rest of this trim, and I don't want that at all. Terrible. I don't even like the blur tool. But if you want to use the blur tool, just go ahead and lock your transparent pixels here before you blur it so it doesn't bleed outside of its area. Alright? So what I'm going to do, rather than blur it, is I want to go ahead and get my burn tool. And I want to choose highlights up here. And I'm going to just burn the outer edges just a little bit. Nothing major. Maybe more here in the shadow area, so I can get my own custom shadows going here and in the front a little bit. And there we go. I have the look that I want. Alright, so now I just want to go ahead and I want to add this same one to my APU vein here. But real quick, let me check on that bevel and emboss. I don't want inner bevel, I want pillow. There we go. Now I can see right now that that's still fine. That's perfect. I'm going to hit OK. And I'm going to hit my movement tool, V for the movement tool. Collapse this guy. I'm going to press Alt, click on it, and drag a copy over here. Free transform it, move it around, and get it to fit here. Let's say huge for now. And that's good. Hit enter, and it's stretched out a little bit, so it's going to give it a different look than what's in here. I flipped it around to also give it a little bit different of a look. And I'm going to come down here to fuselage and find that APU vein, which is right here. Control click it. And again, I don't want to delete it. I want to delete everything around it. So Control Shift I and delete. And there we go. I am done. Now the only exception here is my lighting. I do have the light hitting in the correct spot, but what I might want to do on that one here is up here, I'm going to go ahead and rename this APU vein dirt. And I'm going to go into my effects, and for my, I want to kill the inner shadow. I didn't realize I still had that on those. So I'll have to do that on the other one. I'm going to increase my size here to right about there. I'm going to hit OK. And I'm just going to bump this. With my movement tool selected, just kind of nudge that just a little bit. There we go. Now I got a nice little highlight coming off of here in the front. And to me, that sells the idea. Maybe zoom out to 100. And that's not bad. You can get kind of the same result with inner glow, but inner glow is going to be the whole thing. I don't want that. I just want the one edge. So you have to experiment with those. And changing this one also, I want to shut off that inner shadow and drop shadow. And now everything's contained back in that one little area. And that's going to be the only dirt that I have for it. So that's about it. You know, hopefully I gave you enough things to think about. And in the next tutorial, we're going to go ahead and we're going to flatten our image here. And we're going to get it to its new home. I'm going to keep mine as is, as I mentioned, and mine will not change from here on out. If I do change anything at all, I will be sure to let you know. So go ahead, go through yours, make any changes that you want to make. Maybe create yourself your own dirt folder for your own custom dirt so you have it to bring over to your other paints. Your MD11 maybe, your level D, you know, this technique, it doesn't matter what paint you're using it on. So have at it, go ballistic, and enjoy. And I will see you in the next tutorial.